The last time I saw my husband in our kitchen, he didn't kiss me goodbye. He checked his phone, slid his wedding ring into his pocket like it was spare change, and said, "I'll come back for the rest this weekend." Not, "I'm sorry," not, "let's talk," just logistics. As the front door shut, I realized something terrifying. Mark wasn't just leaving, he was preparing to make sure everyone believed he'd escaped. Before we get into it, please like, share, and subscribe. These stories take time to tell, and if you've ever been slowly erased after giving someone the best years of your life, you're going to understand every word of what happened next. My name is Diane Keller. I'm 62, and until last spring, I would have described my life with one word: stable. The word people use when they mean quiet, predictable, and not worth paying attention to. Mark and I were married for 33 years. We lived in Naperville, Illinois, in a brick house we bought when our kids were small. We raised 2 children, paid off the mortgage, went to the same church, hosted Thanksgiving, and smiled for photos like we were the kind of couple people point at and say, "See, that's what lasts." I believed in routines. I believed in showing up. I believed that if you carried your half, and sometimes more than your half, you earned loyalty in return. I met Mark when I was 27. He worked for a regional logistics company, the kind of place that hands out service awards and expects gratitude. He was handsome in a safe way, a steady handshake, a gentle smile, the kind of man who held doors and remembered names. When he proposed, he said, "We'll be a team." For a long time, we were, but not because he was especially romantic. We were a team because I made sure the team functioned. I worked full-time nearly my entire adult life: receptionist, office manager, compliance coordinator. Mark liked telling people I handled the details, like it was a charming little trait. But the details were the bills, the insurance, the kids' appointments, the college paperwork, the birthday gifts, the aging parents, the funerals, the medicine lists, the check-ins, the invisible labor that keeps a family from drifting into chaos. Mark's job came with a pension. My job came with a calendar, and I carried it like a spine. When Mark turned 60, his back pain got worse. He started coming home exhausted, sitting in his recliner, staring at the TV like it had answers. He talked about retiring early, and everyone told him he deserved it. No one asked what it would do to me because the assumption was simple: Diane will adapt. When he officially retired, we threw a party in our backyard. Neighbors came, church friends came, his old coworkers came. They brought gift cards and jokes about golf. Mark smiled like a man stepping into sunshine, and I smiled like a woman who didn't know she'd just been volunteered for a second full-time job. At first, it was fine. We took walks, made coffee together, talked about traveling. Then the phone started appearing at the table, face down, always face down. If I asked what he was reading, he'd say, "Just news." And if I asked again, he'd sigh like I'd accused him of murder. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and he snapped his screen dark so fast it looked like fear. When I asked, "What was that?" he didn't look ashamed, he looked irritated. "Diane," he said, like I was a child, "can you stop?" Stop, as if curiosity about your own husband is a bad habit. Soon he started leaving the house more. He said he'd joined a cycling group and needed something to keep him moving. I was glad at first. I wanted him healthy. I wanted him happy. I wanted us to enjoy the years we'd worked for. Then I met the group at a welcome breakfast near the river. Most of them were normal, 40s, 50s, laughing about routes and knee braces. And then a woman approached with a laugh that was slightly too loud. Hair glossy, teeth bright, wearing leggings and a fitted jacket like she'd stepped out of an ad. "Hi," she said, holding out her hand. "I'm Tessa." She looked at Mark like he'd been placed on Earth for her personal enjoyment. Mark's cheeks went pink. "Diane?" he said quickly. "This is Tessa. She's new." Tessa smiled at me. Not mean, not hostile, just certain. "He talks about you," she said, and then she didn't add nice things. She said it like I was a topic, a chapter, a duty. I went home with a quiet, sinking certainty. This is how it starts. Over the next few months, Mark's world expanded and mine shrank. He ate breakfast in a rush and left early. He returned late and showered immediately. He stopped asking about my day. If I tried to talk, he'd say he was tired. If I asked why he was distant, he'd say, "You're making it a thing." And when I pressed, he used a new favorite word, anxious. "You've been anxious lately, Diane. You need to relax, Diane. You're reading into everything." He said it so often, I started hearing it in my own head. The day he called me anxious in front of our son was the day something in me cracked. Ryan had stopped by with his wife, Melissa, and their little boy. I made coffee, put out cookies, watched my grandson tear through the hallway like a tiny hurricane. I mentioned Mark's late nights like a joke. Mark set his mug down and said, "She's been anxious. Don't take her too seriously." Ryan laughed awkwardly. Melissa looked away, and I sat there smiling while my own family accepted a new version of me, one I hadn't agreed to. That night, I confronted Mark in our bedroom. I said I didn't like being spoken about like I was unstable. He stared at me for a long moment, then said, "You're proving my point," and rolled over like the conversation was done. 2 weeks later, he said he needed space. Not divorce, space. He said he felt like he'd never lived for himself, that he didn't know who he was anymore. And then he looked at me and said, "I think you've relied on me too much." Me, the woman who carried the calendar, the woman who built the life. I wanted to scream. Instead, I whispered, "Is there someone else?" He didn't meet my eyes. "Don't do this," he said. That was his answer. 3 days later, he signed a lease for a furnished apartment across town. He told me it was temporary. He told Ryan it was for peace. He told church friends he was taking a break to focus on his health. And as he packed a suitcase, he told me, "I don't want this to get ugly." "I don't want this to get ugly" is what you say when you've already planned how to make it ugly. The first week after he left, I cried in the shower, in the laundry room, while folding his t-shirts, because I didn't know if I should put them away or throw them out. But grief is exhausting, and when you've been responsible for everyone else's stability your whole life, your brain eventually clicks into survival mode. On day 8, I stopped crying. On day 9, I made a list, not of feelings, of facts, accounts, policies, dates. I opened a folder on my laptop labeled Retirement, then another labeled Evidence, and I started working. Mark called like nothing had changed, asking where his winter boots were, whether I'd mailed a birthday card to his sister, whether I'd paid property taxes. Even in abandonment, he expected service. So I stopped answering. 2 days later, Ryan called. "Mom," he said carefully, "Dad says you're not handling this well." I heard the narrative forming like a storm. When I said I was handling it, Melissa got on the phone in a too sweet voice. "We just want to make sure you're okay. Stress can do things." That week, 3 women from church, women I'd known for 20 years, canceled lunch plans one after another. One said she was so busy. Another didn't respond at all. The third sent a heart emoji and then posted a smiling selfie with Mark at a charity ride the next day. It was a strange kind of grief, realizing you can be loyal for decades and still be treated like a rumor the moment your marriage stops being convenient for other people. One night, I opened the safe in our closet and pulled out our important documents. Then I noticed something missing, our updated estate binder, the one Mark insisted we refresh 2 years earlier. I searched the house and finally found it shoved behind old towels in the linen closet, like someone had hidden it in a hurry. I opened it, and my stomach dropped. The beneficiary page for Mark's pension had been updated. My name wasn't there. A new primary beneficiary was listed, Tessa Monroe. I sat on the bedroom floor holding that paper like it was a death certificate, not because of the money, but because of the contempt. It meant he'd been planning. It meant he'd looked at 33 years and decided I deserved nothing. The next morning, I called a forensic accountant, not a lawyer. Her name was Valerie Rosen. She spoke in a calm, precise voice that felt like oxygen. "I want to understand what's mine," I told her. "Then we start with disclosure," she said, "and we assume he's hiding something." I gathered every statement I could access: tax returns, insurance policies, retirement documents. I scanned, saved, organized. No Facebook posts, no dramatic phone calls, just receipts. 2 weeks into this new life, my mother had a stroke. Sudden. She'd been living independently in a small condo, proud of her stubborn autonomy. I was her medical power of attorney, so I drove to the hospital and sat beside her bed while machines beeped softly and strangers spoke in gentle voices. Mark didn't come. Not once. Ryan didn't come either. Melissa texted, "We're busy with the baby." Sitting there alone, I realized I was grieving my marriage, and at the same time, the myth that my family would show up for me when it mattered. My mother died 10 days later. When I called Mark, he paused, then said, "I'm sorry, I can't make it to the service. Things are complicated right now." Complicated. He meant his feelings, not mine. At the funeral, I stood alone at the front of the chapel. Ryan arrived late and sat with his wife. When people asked where Mark was, Ryan answered for him. "He's giving Mom space." Space, like I was a fire and he was the victim. After the service, an older woman from church squeezed my hands and whispered, "Men have needs, dear. Don't push him away." I drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, because there are betrayals that come from strangers and betrayals that come from people who watched you build a life and still blamed you when it collapsed. The night after the funeral, I returned home to find an email from Mark with the subject line, "Next Steps." He wanted to meet about an amicable arrangement. He said he didn't want lawyers. He said he wanted peace. People who want peace don't start by stealing your future. They also don't start by calling you unstable, quietly, to anyone who will listen. We met at a coffee shop. Mark wore a new jacket and expensive cologne, hands folded like a pastor. He said he cared about me and didn't want this to be hard. Then he offered me a deal. He'd keep the pension, his retirement, and the house. I could keep my small 401k and my car, as if he expected gratitude. I didn't react. I slid the beneficiary page across the table. Mark's eyes flicked down and his face hardened. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. "I live in the house," I said. He accused me of snooping, then laughed and said, "Tessa is just a friend." He said the word friend like it was a shield, like it would make the paperwork disappear. When I stayed quiet, he leaned in and warned, "Diane, you're making this ugly." I smiled slightly. "No," I said. "You already did." And I left. Valerie called later that afternoon. She'd found a separate account, not huge, but steady monthly transfers for 2 years. The mailing address wasn't Mark's apartment. It was Ryan's house. I sat down, staring at the statement until the numbers stopped meaning anything. It wasn't the amount that made me dizzy. It was the coordination. It was the idea that my own child had become a mailbox for my husband's secrets. I didn't call Ryan in rage. I didn't text him in caps. I cooked dinner, laid the table, and invited him over as if nothing was wrong. Because if you want the truth, you don't give liars time to script it. Ryan arrived tense, eyes flicking around the kitchen like he expected a trap. I asked about work. I asked about my grandson. I listened until his shoulders lowered. Then I placed the account statement on the table. His face went pale. "Mom, I don't know what that is." I pointed to the address. He swallowed and finally admitted. Dad asked if he could use our address. He said it was for privacy. "From who?" I asked. His eyes watered. "From you," he whispered. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I asked, "Did you know about Tessa?" His silence answered. I nodded and said, "Okay, thank you for telling me." He looked confused, like my calm meant surrender. Sometimes calm means the door just closed forever. Within weeks, Mark filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. He asked for temporary exclusive use of the home. He painted me as unstable. He began suggesting, casually to the right people, that I might not be okay alone. And then the worst threat came, not from Mark's attorney, but from Melissa. She called me after Ryan's bedtime, voice tight, and said, "Diane, we love you, but we can't have chaos around the baby. If this gets messy, we'll need some distance." Distance. That was the word. Not because I'd done anything to my grandson, because I had feelings, because I was inconvenient. I hung up and stared at the dark kitchen window, realizing Mark wasn't just leaving me, he was positioning me to lose everyone. A woman I'd brought casseroles to after her surgery posted photos of Mark and Tessa at a cycling event with the caption, "Love wins." Half the comments were cheering. A few said, "Praying for your new chapter." One said, "You deserve happiness." No one said my name. That was the strange part. I was already being written out, like a character from the first season who didn't test well with audiences. Then my dog, Charlie, got sick. 12-year-old golden retriever. He'd slept beside my kids when they had fevers and waited by the door for Mark every evening. After Mark left, Charlie stopped eating for days. The vet said cancer, fast and aggressive. I held Charlie's head in my lap on the clinic floor until the room went quiet. When it was over, I walked to my car and realized there was no one I could call who would come sit with me. Not Mark, not Ryan, not the women who used to text me recipes. I drove home alone with Charlie's collar in my hand and cried on my kitchen floor until my chest ached. That was the night I almost gave up. Not on the divorce, but on myself. Because grief piled on grief starts to feel like the universe is selecting you for punishment. Then I remembered, Mark wasn't just leaving, he was trying to erase me. So I stood up and kept going. Nora Kaplan, the divorce attorney Valerie recommended, moved fast. She filed a financial restraining order and demanded full disclosure. Mark responded with charm. He told people he was worried about me, that I was not acting like myself, that he wanted to make sure I was safe. When charm didn't work, he turned to paperwork. Mark's attorney claimed I was emotionally volatile and requested a psychological evaluation. He wanted a file that would follow me like a shadow and whisper, "unstable." Meanwhile, Nora discovered Mark's disclosures were incomplete. He listed the main retirement count, but not the second. He listed the pension, but not the beneficiary change. And then she found something worse. A home equity line of credit opened 6 months earlier, in both our names, without my knowledge. The money from that ELOC had been transferred out as a down payment on a condo in Tessa's name. My husband borrowed against our house to buy another woman a home, then told people I was anxious. Valerie went back through the estate binder, page by page. That's when she found the language Mark had tucked into our refresh, a conditional power of attorney clause that would give Ryan control of our assets if I were deemed unable to manage affairs. It wasn't just a clause. It was a strategy. If Mark could label me incompetent, he wouldn't have to fight me. He could manage me. He could keep me comfortable while quiet me moving money, selling property, deciding my life like I was a dependent. A legal cage built out of the word anxious. I didn't confront Ryan immediately. I needed to know how deep it went. Then Melissa texted late one night, "Can we talk?" When she came over, her hands trembled around her mug like she couldn't keep the heat inside. She swore she didn't know about the condo money or the power of attorney clause. What she did admit was this: Ryan believed Mark when he said it was to protect me from stress, that I might spiral, that Dad was worried I'd do something drastic. My normal grief had been recast as danger. Then Melissa whispered the smaller truth that explained the rest. Mark had promised to help them buy a bigger house. He told them, "I'm restructuring things," like he was a businessman, not a husband with an affair. My husband wasn't just recruiting my son, he was buying him with future comfort and the illusion of security. I thanked Melissa for telling me and said, "If you ever need the truth, ask me, not him." She nodded like a woman realizing she'd married into a story she didn't fully understand. My daughter, Erin, had been distant for months. She lived in Denver and heard Mark's version through Ryan. Mom is anxious. Dad is trying to be kind. It's complicated. Valerie suggested I send Erin one thing, a simple timeline with documents, dates, facts. Erin called the next day. Her voice was small. "Mom," she said, "I'm so sorry. I believed him. I didn't punish her. I simply told her, if you want to understand me, come see me." Erin flew in 2 weeks later, hugged me so tightly I almost broke, and stayed for 3 days. She cooked, cleaned, listened, and one night said, "He made you the villain so he could be the hero." When she said it out loud, the whole story snapped into focus. Erin confronted Ryan on speakerphone from my living room. She didn't scream, she asked questions. "Did you know he changed Mom off the pension? Did you know he used the house to buy Tessa a condo?" Ryan stuttered, defended, minimized. Erin's voice went quiet and deadly. "You're helping him erase her." When the call ended, Erin sat beside me and said, "Whatever happens, I'm not letting them rewrite you." I felt something in my chest loosen, because one person seeing you clearly can keep you alive. The temporary orders hearing arrived. Mark showed up with Tessa, not inside the courtroom, but in the hallway. She stood there like a trophy, like a declaration. Mark walked past me without looking at my face. Tessa did look, and she smiled that same certain smile, the kind a woman wears when she thinks she's stolen the future. In the courtroom, Mark's attorney argued Mark should have exclusive use of the home because I was emotionally unstable. Nora stood and presented the undisclosed account, the HELOC, the condo down payment, the beneficiary change, and the conditional power of attorney language. The judge's eyebrows rose, and Mark's confidence drained like someone pulled a plug. The judge denied Mark's request, ordered asset transfers frozen, and demanded complete disclosure within 30 days. In the hallway afterward, Mark grabbed my arm and hissed, "Are you trying to ruin me?" I looked at his hand on my skin and said quietly, "You ruined yourself." He released me like I'd burned him. Discovery was brutal. Mark's lawyer demanded personal records to paint me as unstable. Therapy notes, medical visits, prescriptions, anything that could be made to look dramatic. Nora pushed back, but the message was clear. He didn't just want to leave me, he wanted to discredit me on his way out. Then Mark was deposed. Valerie sat beside Nora with a stack of printouts. Mark tried to act confused about the second account. Valerie asked about the mailing address. "Why is your son's address listed?" Mark looked at his attorney, then said, "My wife was anxious. I didn't want her worried." The court reporter typed every word. The lie looked smaller on paper than it did in his mouth. That's the thing about legal records. They don't reward charisma. They reward consistency. After the deposition, Mark's tone shifted. He sent a text, "We can still do this quietly." Then another, "Think about the kids." Then, "Stop listening to those people," as if Nora and Valerie were witches and I was helpless under a spell. I didn't respond. Silence is a boundary that costs nothing and terrifies people who rely on access. In September, our church held a fall picnic. I almost didn't go. I pictured whispering, sideways glances, polite smiles that felt like punishment. Erin said, "We're going," and she drove me there like a bodyguard in jeans. Mark arrived late, laughing too loudly, Tessa on his arm in a bright jacket like she wanted to be seen. People greeted them warmly, at first. Then someone asked, innocently, "So where are you living now?" And Mark's face tightened because he couldn't answer without revealing the condo, the HELOC, the mess. Later, a woman approached Erin and said, "Your father says your mother is having a hard time." Erin smiled and said, "My mother is fine. My father took out a line of credit against their house to buy his girlfriend a condo." The woman's mouth fell open. Erin didn't raise her voice. She simply walked away. Within 10 minutes, you could feel the air change. People didn't rush to Mark anymore. They drifted away, suddenly busy, suddenly needing to check on someone else. Mark kept smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. That was the beginning of his social death. By late summer, the settlement conference arrived, and Mark looked different, less polished, more tired. Tessa wasn't with him. I learned she'd moved out of the condo after Mark started calling it our money again and resenting her for the consequences. She loved the story of a man reclaiming his life. She didn't love the story of a man paying for his choices. Mark tried to come back to me in small ways. A text, "How are you?" "We should talk." He even sent a photo of our grandson, like he could bait me with love. I didn't respond, because reaching for you only when they're losing isn't love, it's panic. Nora laid out our demand: half the pension, half the retirement, reimbursement for the HELOC funds, attorney fees, and corrected beneficiaries. Mark's attorney scoffed. Mark looked up at me and said softly, "Diane, don't do this." I leaned forward and kept my voice calm. "My mother died while you were busy protecting yourself," I said. "Charlie died while you were telling everyone I was anxious. You tried to set up a legal clause so my own son could control my life. You don't get to ask me for mercy now." Mark's face crumpled, and for 1 second I saw the man I married. Then he blinked and looked away, and it vanished. After the agreement, there were still details that felt like little deaths, signing papers that turned "we" into "mine," changing passwords, watching my last name on forms become a question mark. Every signature was a reminder that permanence is an illusion you pay for until it breaks. Mark tried one last time to reclaim the moral high ground. He emailed Erin a long message about family and forgiveness, attaching photos from our old vacations like they were proof he'd been a good man. Erin forwarded it to me with one line: "He's selling nostalgia because he has no integrity left." A week later, I received a draft court order that restored my beneficiary rights and divided the pension properly. It was clinical language, cold and boring, exactly what I needed. It didn't care about his feelings, or Tessa's smile, or the story he told at church. It cared about the numbers and the law. The first time Mark saw that the pension could not be reassigned back to me out of kindness, that it would be enforced whether he liked it or not, his tone changed. He stopped sounding like a saint and started sounding like a man shocked that consequences were real. Then came Thanksgiving. I used to host. Turkey, pies, folding chairs squeezed around the dining table, everyone talking at once. That year, Ryan said they were doing it at Melissa's parents' house. Mark said nothing. Aaron flew in, and the two of us ate a small dinner in my kitchen with Charlie's empty bed in the corner and my mother's casserole dish still in the cupboard. I cried when Aaron fell asleep on the couch, not because of Mark, because of the empty seats. Because I could feel how easily a woman can become optional once she stops providing the background labor that keeps everybody comfortable. In December, the court entered final orders. I sat in my car afterward and held the stamped papers in my lap like a strange trophy. I didn't feel joy. I felt relief so deep it made me tired. The fight had been less about money than about refusing to be turned into a cautionary tale for other women. When the QDRO paperwork finally went through, those retirement division orders that take forever, I opened the letter alone at my kitchen counter. The numbers weren't even what mattered. What mattered was that the future he tried to steal had been returned to me in black ink. Valerie called to check in, and I thanked her for believing me before anyone else did. She said, "Diane, you did the hard part. You stayed steady." And I realized steadiness had always been my strength. Mark just tried to turn it into a weakness. That night, I made one decision that felt like breathing again. I stopped checking Mark's social media through other people. I stopped asking who was on his side. I stopped trying to manage the story. I let the story go because my life was finally back in my hands. The settlement came 2 weeks later. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was enough. Enough money, enough protection, enough truth on paper that Mark couldn't rewrite the ending or lock me inside that quiet legal cage. Ryan didn't call for months. When he finally did, he said, "Dad's struggling." And then, as if repeating a script, he says you turned everyone against him. I kept my voice gentle. "No," I said. "I told the truth. The truth did the rest." Ryan went quiet, then whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't, but I said, "I love you." Love doesn't mean access. You'll have to rebuild trust. The first time I saw my grandson after the divorce, it was in a park with Aaron beside me and Ryan 10 feet away like he wasn't sure if I'd vanish. My grandson ran into my arms anyway, because children know love in a way adults sometimes forget. I held him and promised myself I would never let Mark weaponize tenderness again. Over the next year, I sold the Naperville house, not because Mark made me, but because I refused to haunt a place where my life had been used against me. I bought a smaller home near Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, where the water is quiet and the trees don't know my history. Aaron visits often. We drink coffee on my porch and talk honestly now. Sometimes we cry, sometimes we laugh. I volunteer at a local community center and made new friends who know me as I am, not as Mark's ex-wife, not as the anxious woman, just Diane. Mark lives alone. The condo is in foreclosure because HELOC payments don't disappear. They just become someone's problem, and this time it was his. Tessa is gone. The cycling group moved on, and the church that once treated him like a brave man chasing happiness now treats him like a cautionary tale. Not because I begged them to, because documents don't care who smiles prettiest. I still feel sadness sometimes. You don't erase 33 years like chalk. But I also feel peace, the kind that comes from knowing you survived an attempt to erase you and you stayed standing anyway. If you're listening and you're in the middle of something similar, here's what I learned. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to beg for fairness. You don't have to convince people who enjoy misunderstanding you. You only have to protect your reality and let the truth do what it does best. Stand there, unmoving, until everyone else catches up. My name is Diane, and this was The Last Straw. If you enjoyed this story, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe.